Good evening. Welcome to the Spring Warrant Review meeting. I am Martha Hanner, Local Action Chair for the Amherst League of Women Voters. The League has organized tonight's meeting in conjunction with the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee for the purpose of acquainting town meeting members with the warrant articles that will come before you when a town meeting convenes on April 30th. The League works to encourage voting at all levels, including local government. To this end, we publish Your Amherst Government and the Town Meeting Handbook, both of which are available on the table in the back of the room if you don't already have one. They are also available on our website as a file you can download, www.lwvamherst.org. We also prepare They Represent You, which is a contact list of all town meeting members and local officials, and that will be published in a few weeks. To finance these publications, we hold an annual book sale on the Common. This year it will be Friday to Sunday, May 4th, 5th, and 6th. Quality books at bargain prices, and we invite all of you to participate. We want to thank Amherst Media for televising tonight's program, and welcome to those of you who are watching from home. To our live audience, please check that your cell phones are turned off. Okay. Now I would like to introduce Peggy Roberts, Chair of the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee, who will describe the procedure to be followed for tonight's meeting. Thank you.
The Town Meeting Coordinating Committee is elected by members of town meeting, and our whole purpose really is to inform voters, make town meeting work well, and really informed voters are essential to good government. I think the League joins us in this effort always. We spend most of the time in our committee trying to figure out ways to help you prepare for town meeting. The warrant review tonight is just going to introduce you really to the articles, and those of you that have brought your warrant with you, if you're a town meeting member, you received a packet with your copy of the warrant. We're not going to go from 1 down to 30 in order necessarily, because we have grouped articles for instance, the Finance Committee, and also to allow people who had conflicts to take part in the meeting. There are 30 articles that we need to cover, so we're going to need to follow a timed schedule, and we have Adrian Terizzi and Martha Hanner down front here. They're going to have cards that warn the speakers when you have 2 minutes more. Let's see, what did we say? 30 seconds more, and then to stop. And the time that you speakers are allotted include some questions. We're not going to be real strict. If anyone before you has taken less time, you know, we'll be a little easy on you. Harrison?
Does that 3 minutes include the questions?
Yeah.
3 minutes total for everyone?
Yeah. And Harrison Gregg, our town moderator, who will be moderating town meeting, is going to lead the meeting. Harrison?
Thank you, Peggy, Martha, Amherst Media, the League, and TMCC for arranging this evening. Article 1 on every annual town meeting warrant is always the same, and it's to see if the town will hear those reports of town officers, the Finance Committee, and any other town boards or committees which are not available in written form. The ideal is that reports will be available in written form, and indeed the Finance Committee does have a very comprehensive written report, but there's always some material to be given concerning the Finance Committee, and there are usually 2 or 3 other committees who feel that they need to present their material orally to town meeting, particularly for the benefit of those people who are watching from home. So the important thing to remember about Article 1 is that we're not approving reports. We're not discussing the reports. We're merely deciding, are we going to hear the reports? And if we have a positive vote on this, affirmative vote on this, we will then either hear the reports right away or hear them later in the meeting. The moderator decides at what point the reports will be heard. The only reports I know about at this point for this annual town meeting, first of all, we always have a report from the Finance Committee at the annual town meeting. We usually hear that just before the budget comes up. We usually hear from the superintendent, and there may be probably from the town manager. Beyond that, I know of one committee which has a report, which is the Regional School Planning Committee. And I may hear of others before town meeting takes place. So that's all I have to say about Article 1. And now we're going to move immediately to Article 29. We're going to hear from the petitioner, Ruth Hook. She has 4 minutes.
Good evening. You all should have received one of these orange sheets. You should label it Article 29. It refers to Article 29. The purpose of our petition, and thus of the bylaw we are proposing, is to make our community both more safe and less fearful of the police. It will have the effect of preventing immigrants who have had minor infractions or no interactions at all with the police from being deported. So far in our country, 79% of all immigrants who have been deported have had only minor offenses or no interaction with the police. 54% have had no interaction with the police, and yet they have been deported. So this is what we're trying to prevent. It is also to counter the thrust of the federal government's Secure Communities program to come into effect at the end of 2013, by which local law enforcement officials must report to immigration authorities all interaction with the police. We believe that such a program would greatly endanger the trust which community members have of the police and lead to the lack of reporting of such events as domestic violence. The petition is based on Title 28, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 20, by which police reports to the FBI do not go to other agencies. We have amended our petition slightly to say that the FBI will not report them specifically to immigration authorities. The goal is that so that our local police do not have to enforce federal immigration laws. I yield the floor to Jeff Napolitano from the American Friends Service Committee, who will be glad to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? Just to put a finer point on it is, most people are not aware, and in fact, many law enforcement officials are not aware, that by the end of 2013, as Ruth said, implementing and enforcing immigration laws is going to be on the burden of local municipalities, specifically local police departments. What we're proposing is a valid legal mechanism that exists in the Code of Federal Regulations to prevent Amherst Police Department and the town of Amherst from enforcing federal immigration policy. It is the role of the federal government. It is not the role of local government to do that. And we're just proposing that that Amherst actually maintain its policy of not implementing immigration policy. Yes?
What is that federal regulation that gives the town of Amherst that authority?
It's 28 CFR 20. It's on the second side, the opposite page at the very bottom of that that bright orange piece of paper, and it's also cited directly in the bylaw, both in the whereases and in the be it resolved.
Title 28, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 20 and follows.
Right. Yes, Max.
Yeah, is this part of are other communities pursuing this as part of, in other words, would we be part of a larger?
We would be the first, if passed in Springtown meeting, we would be the first to pass a bylaw that does this. There are other cities in the country that have issued executive orders of to the same effect.
Mr. Aragon?
So when you cite Part 20, it must mean that there are specific regulations within Part 20 which are the authority, because a part isn't the authority. It has to be specific regulations. So can you cite the specific regulations?
In the proposed bylaw, it actually says 28 CFR 20 et al. It's not just that one section, it's all the following sections which allow originating entities the ability to restrict how the FBI handles the information that is sent to them. Yes?
Excuse me,
What if the person is convicted of a violent crime? That information could not go to INS?
No. In fact, whether somebody is convicted or not is not what the Amherst Police Department sends to the FBI. This is when the Amherst Police Department actually sends a request to the FBI asking if somebody has committed a violent crime. If somebody has been convicted of a criminal offense, they will, as they do now, receive verification of that fact. But what they won't receive are alleged undocumented status of people who are picked up by the police. Yes, sir?
I had one more question for you. Article 1. By the end of 2013, you said that the police department will be required. I wondered if there was any other federal agencies like the public school system will also have to be reporting, or is this just the police department?
At the moment, this is limited to the police, local law enforcement, and local municipalities.
Thank you. Question.
Next, we'll hear from Select Board Chair Stephanie O'Keefe, who will discuss Articles 5, 6, and 7.
Good evening. Thank you very much for being here and getting well prepared for town meeting. I'll be talking about Articles 5, 6, and 7. Article 5 is a street acceptance for Sunrise Avenue. And I have a map here. I'll show you where that is. But this is the wrong map. This is Article 7. Here we go. There we go. Sunrise Avenue is just a short street off of South Whitney Street, and it has 5 or 6 houses on it. It is currently a private way, and it serves several residents as well as the Amherst Housing Authority. The Housing Authority entered into an agreement with the town to pave the roadway and to bring it up to town standards with the understanding that it would then be petitioned to town meeting for acceptance as a public way. And according to the Department of Public Works, the road does meet town standards and is ready to be accepted as a public way, which means that we would take over the plowing of it and the maintenance of it, et cetera. Article 6 is a street acceptance. I didn't bring a map for this one. It's a street acceptance for the altered layout of University Drive. I'm sure we're all very familiar with University Drive. And what we're talking about here is the area right in front of the Big Y Plaza, where there has been a lot of work and reconfiguration over the last year or so. When that road got reconfigured, you get a little bit of shifting of the easements and what part becomes part of the public way or not. So we need to with all those easements in place, we need to now accept the altered version of University Drive as part of our public ways. And you can't just leave, even though it's kind of like little slivers and you might think, who cares? It does affect things like, first of all, you want it to be uniformed. And secondly, things like Chapter 90 funds for maintaining the road can only be used for public ways. So we have to make sure that all parts of it are part of the public way. And Article 7 is sewer easements for the Harkness Road project. So we have Harkness Road here. You can see Belchertown Road. So this is, I think folks know where Harkness Road is. As we voted at last town meeting, the town sewers are going to be extended to Harkness Road, and by and large, the sewers are going to go right down the middle of the street. So that's not the easements we're looking for. The DPW has found that there are some deep spots in parts of Harkness Road that they want to avoid. They don't want to have to install the sewer too deep, and that is in the area around Stony Hill Road, between Amherst Welding and Stony Hill Road, right here. Those easements have not been worked out yet, so we don't have specific details about them. But what this article would do is allow the select board to take those easements if they can be worked out with the property owners. If they can't be worked out, then there would be nothing to take, and this wouldn't be relevant at all. But that is just to try and facilitate the installation of the sewer line. I have 30 seconds, so if there are any questions, I'll see what I can do with them. Anyone? Okay. Max.
Max.
Just to understand the difference between acquire by purchase, gift, or eminent domain, there's a big difference between those. So does this, in other words, does this authorize spending of money to do this, or?
This is sort of allows anything to happen. Nothing is, there's no money that's intended to change hands for this. This would just be sort of an agreement with the property owners. If money were going to change hands, that would be a different issue, and town meeting would actually have to appropriate that money.
Okay, but it says acquire by purchase.
This is, yeah,
Okay, that's just
standard language.
standard language.
Somebody might have a better answer than that for you, but as far as I'm concerned, that's just standard language. They always say that, so.
Okay.
I've gotten used to it. You will too.
Could I just ask people, if you have a question, to wait for the microphone? We can hear you here, but this is being televised and recorded, and they won't be able to hear you at home if you don't wait for the microphone.
The authorizations in these articles require only a majority vote of town meeting. If there were money were going to be spent, it would have to indicate that in the article, and that would take a 2/3 vote if you're purchasing land. That's taking or accepting streets is one of the several duties that town meeting alone can do, along with appropriating money, passing bylaws, passing zoning bylaws, and certain other things that are contained in state statutes that give the authority to town meeting to accept the statute or to make some decision based on the statute. And we're going to see some of those coming up now in the next few articles. Those are going to be covered by Andrew Steinberg, the chair of the Finance Committee. Mr. Steinberg.
Okay, thank you, and I want to thank the League of Women Voters and TMCC for sponsoring tonight's event, and I think it's always been very helpful. And I hope that you find it helpful. The budget is one of the more complex and important things that town meeting does, because you're adopting the spending plan for the town of Amherst, which incorporates how we use our tax money and other money that's available to us, and how we set our priorities for what is most important. And it is one of the essential duties of the town meeting. The Finance Committee's role is to, as a committee of town meeting, to develop a budget proposal to present to you in a series of motions together with several other committees, and I'm going to try and explain it all. I'm going to give you a little bit of this as a what I'll call Budget 101, because I realize that there are new members to town meeting this year, both here, a few here tonight and some who are watching at home, and I want to do as much as I can to make the budget process a part of the presentation, and I'll be very interested in your comments as to whether this is a helpful approach to take. It's a little different from what I've done in prior years. What you're seeing on the first slide in the very first section is a notation about the difference of fiscal years. We are currently in fiscal year 12 operating on a budget that was adopted last year at the annual town meeting, and we are about to adopt the FY13 budget at the town meeting that we're all preparing for now. And there's only one article that you'll be considering that I'll come back to Actually, I'll just touch on it real quickly now. It's referenced, if you look up where it says FY12, Article 8. That is the one article. It has to do with fiscal year that we're presently in, and that's budget amendments. And at times, because of changes that occurred during the course of the year, it's necessary to do some budget amendments that require action of town meeting. And this may happen at special town meetings in the fall or at other times during the year, and it happens at the annual town meeting. There are 3 specific ones that are listed in your warrant, and I won't try and explain them tonight because we'll get lost in the details of them if I try. But they will be explained in the Finance Committee report, and they will be explained more fully when you consider them on the floor of town meeting. They're all very simple, straightforward housekeeping kinds of things that just make sense to do in the orderly course of business. The big work of the town meeting is going to be to work on the budget articles for the year that we're about to enter. And there are a number of different articles that are a part of that. Some that have to do with the operating budget, which is were motions of the Finance Committee for the most part. The capital articles, which are motions from the Joint Capital Planning Committee, which is a separate process, and Ms. Moran is going to talk about those after I'm completed with my presentation. Article 21 has to do with the Community Preservation Act, and the chair of that committee is presenting later this evening and will explain Article 21 to you. There's a couple other things that I want to note as I finish out the first slide. The town also receives grants both through the schools and the town itself. Grants are not part of the operating budget, and they are not therefore appropriated, though they are reported to you, and it is information that is provided for you, but it is not part of the appropriation. The other thing that we'll be touching on at several points along the way is the term reserves, and I want to touch on that to also note later I'll be mentioning reserve fund, and reserve fund is not the same as reserves. Reserves is kind of like the savings account for the town. It's where we are, the investment account. It's where we place our funds that we have in our bank account, and we try and carry on an ongoing basis a bank account that's equal to between 5 and 15% of our annual revenue as a matter of sound fiscal business practice. And there are 2 articles towards the end that have to do with the 2 parts of reserves. Free cash, which is money that gets transferred in and out on just a majority vote of town meeting, and may come into the free cash account just because we have excess unspent funds, and that doesn't even require a vote. The stabilization fund is more of an investment account, and it requires 2/3 vote of town meeting, both to place money into a stabilization fund and take money out of a stabilization fund. On the next slide, you see the revenue sources for the town, and I think that it's important to just recognize where our money comes from, and just mention one article as I do that. The property tax is the largest source of revenue, and it is I think we all know what the property tax is. I think that it's important to know, though, that property tax, because of Proposition 2.5 that passed in 1980, can only go up 2.5% per year plus new growth. And new growth comes because there's new development in town, new construction. That's the only way that you get new growth that enlarges the tax base and allows taxes to go up more than 2.5%. And the amount that the property taxes increasing this year from FY12 to FY13 is projected to be 3.3%. The reason I note that is because you have to remember that inflation is going to take up the 3.3%, and it's very important that we all recognize that just because the budget is going up doesn't necessarily mean that there's capacity to do a whole lot of new and different things. We really are constricted by what is the natural growth, and the same is true on state aid, which has not gone up. It's actually gone down for the past 5 years, and this year we'll have a better idea tomorrow when the House Ways and Means Committee is expected to release its budget, but we're expecting it to be level funded from FY12 to FY13. So we're budgeting under very tight times when you start looking at our two largest sources going up 3.3% and 0%. At the bottom of the page, it says does not include enterprise funds. And I'm going to talk about enterprise funds a little bit because you'll be voting on enterprise funds later. So I'll come back to that when I get into the more specific motions. But I did want to specifically note that. On the next page, then you'll see a graph that shows how the money is divided up and where the big pieces of the expenditures are. What we're trying to do each year, for the most part, and I think is our real goal and our real challenge, is to maintain the current programs in the schools and the libraries and in the town from year to year, and that is what the budget process tends to largely be about. You will be getting a lot of information about the proposed expenditures. This is from last year. When you get it this year, it will be a different color. But this is what the Finance Committee report to town meeting looks like, and you will be receiving it about a little more than a week before town meeting. And it contains descriptions of the entire warrant, descriptions of the budget, narrative explanations of the factors affecting the budget, and the Finance Committee recommendations on the budget and on any articles that may have a financial impact upon the town. The budget itself is considered in a series of motions, and when we go to the next page, you'll begin to see what some of those motions are all about and how they tie back to the articles. And so I wanted, I'll just go through them because ultimately this is a warrant review meeting, and I want to get back so where you can tie what I'm saying about the budget to the articles on the warrant. Article 9 is a retirement assessment, and we belong to the Hampshire County Retirement System for most of our employees. I think pretty much all of our employees. In order to get the money in for our employees that goes into the retirement system that is then invested by the county retirement system and used to pay the retirees what is obligated to them in the retirement plans. We have an assessment each year, and that is voted as Article 9. Article 10 has to do with the regional lockup. Every town needs to have some facility when the police arrest somebody if they need to detain the person as a place to detain them. And if each town was to have its own facility, it would need staff around the clock 7 days a week to supervise the lockup, and it would have to have facilities for men and for women and staff to supervise men and women. It would be a very expensive operation. So all of the towns within Hampshire County belong to a regional lockup, which is located in Northampton, adjacent to the House of Corrections. And each year, towns are assessed for a regional lockup assessment, which is substantially less than if we maintained our own facility. So that's what Article 10 is. Article 11 is not actually an appropriation of funds. It has to do with the methodology for the region, and I'm going to, this is probably one of the most complex things. I'll try and describe as simply as possible. The regional schools are comprised of 4 towns, Amherst, Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury, and the question is, once a budget is adopted for the regional schools, then how is it divided up and assigned, what portion is assigned to each of the towns? State law provides what's known as a default mechanism, and it's a very complex formula that if towns that are involved in a regional district don't do anything else, you use the default methodology. And it was long ago determined that the default methodology doesn't really work for our region. So our region got together, the 4 towns, and came to the conclusion that the thing that made sense, because it was predictable, it was understandable, it was to just say, let's take a 5-year rolling average of the last 5 years of the students from each town that are within the middle school and high school, and use that as a proportion to divide up the assessments for the regional schools. State law requires that that be approved each year by all 4 town meetings in the region, and that is what Article 11 does. It is something that is presented each year to all 4 towns. All 4 towns have to pass it in order to be able to continue with the method that we've agreed upon for many years in our region, is how to go about dividing up that assessment. The budget is actually a part of Article 12. So then we get into Article 12, which is actually then the operating budget itself in a series of motions, and I'm not going to try and go into any detail because I wouldn't have time in each of these motions. The other thing I want to make it very clear is that the order that you're seeing on the screen of the various motions is not necessarily the order that they will be presented at town meeting or presented in the book. We will be making that decision tomorrow night, but at the request of Town Meeting Coordinating Committee, we've been asked to consider each year a process of varying the order, and we each year make the decision as to what we should do. And so the question of the order is not yet determined, and what you're seeing is not the order. But the first 5 are the sections of town government itself, the municipal functions of town government. And I gave after, in parentheses after each one, what some of the major sections are in each of those areas. The last one is general fund indebtedness, and that's a separate motion. We issue bonds for various purposes to purchase things that make sense to buy by borrowing and not borrow out of cash, much as a family would do. And when we do that, we have to pay back our debts. And so each year we have to allocate the funds for the amount that are due, and that's what that motion will be. On the next slide, we're going to continue, and you'll see the next 3 are library services, which is for the amount from taxation for the Jones Library, but we also are presented with a budget from the trustees, and we present the trustees' budget to you. You vote to accept the trustees' budget, and then you vote at the same time to assess the portion that we have proposed to allocate through the process and through from the Finance Committee for library. Elementary schools are run by the town of Amherst, and that's a direct appropriation, as with other town departments, but presented as a separate motion. The regional schools, I mentioned the methodology. You will get then a presentation of the regional school budget, the total amount of the budget, and approve the budget and the portion that is the assessment for the town of Amherst. Then the last 5 things that are listed under Article 12 are the enterprise funds, and I mentioned enterprise funds before. You see what they are listed. I won't read them all to you, but I'll use water fund to just quickly explain what enterprise funds are. Enterprise funds are enterprises or businesses that the town runs, where what we do as a community in providing a service is supported by fees for the service. And so homeowners and landlords and commercial interests in the university and all users of water receive water bills. So the water bills are paid into this building, but they go into the water fund, which is an enterprise fund. The expenses to maintain the water system and the improvements to the water system come out of the water fund. And that's what the enterprise fund is about. So the enterprise fund budgets will be considered in 5 separate motions for those 5. And then the last thing that's listed on this page is Article 14. Article 14 is the reserve fund, and I made a comment earlier that reserve fund is different from reserves. And I wish that they used a different term, but I can't help it because it's a matter of state law. But all towns have one, and what we do is, because things will happen during the year that may require additional expenditures, money is put into a reserve fund, and the Finance Committee is authorized to make expenditures from the reserve fund during the course of the year if there's a need to do so. If there's no need to spend money that's been allocated in the reserve fund and it ends the year that it has not been spent, that money then reverts into what I described earlier in the free cash account. And the reserve fund proposal has stayed the same for as long as I can remember. It says $100,000, and that is the proposal for the reserve fund. On the last page, you'll see then 2 motions as Articles 22 and 23, free cash and stabilization. And those come at the very end of the budget process, because ultimately we have to make the budget balance. And if there have been amendments to budgets that either take the amount that we're proposing to spend above or below what was proposed initially, then it may require that money be taken from or placed into free cash. However, this year, we actually are proposing an expenditure of free cash right to begin with. The reason is for the elementary school budget. And basically, the Finance Committee has taken a very cautious view as of late on the reserves, and we don't believe it's appropriate to use reserves except for very exceptional circumstances when we know that there's going to be money in a subsequent year or savings in a subsequent year to make up the difference. The elementary schools voted to accept students under school choice, as you will have read in the newspaper and you will hear more about, and in anticipation of knowing that we'll be receiving that money for school choice in FY14, the proposal is to go ahead and allow the stability in the schools by using reserves on a one-time basis in FY13. And then the last slide I'll just touch on real quickly, because I want to see if there's any quick burning questions, because I'm running low on time. But the budget process runs from October to April with all of the different groups that you see there: Finance Committee, Select Board, Town Manager, School Committee, Superintendent, Library Trustees, Library Director, all providing input into what the priorities are and to what it is that is needed to maintain services at the current level, or approximately the current level. which is ultimately what, under the circumstances, our best goal, one that because of the 5 years of cuts we have not been able to maintain in recent years. But I think that we're pleased this year that we're finally at that point. But the goal is always to develop a balanced budget because we need to assure the present and future stability of the town. And ultimately, then we get down to town meeting. There's a town meeting process for consideration of budgets. The Finance Committee will, a member will make a motion. The moderator will ask the Select Board for its position and then ask if there are questions about each section of a particular functional motion if there's more than one. For example, in public safety, you'll ask if there are any questions about police, fire, the police facility, communication center, animal welfare. At that point, there's a process for accepting motions. There's a request that motions be provided in advance with 3 copies to the chair of the Finance Committee, chair of the Select Board, and the moderator. And when, after discussion of the motions, there's a series of 1 or more votes in order to determine the amount of the budget, and the process is to always vote the highest amount first. And the last thing I'll say just about it is that, 2 quick last things. One is that town meeting votes a budget. It does not bind the purpose, so that if there's a desire to increase a budget for a particular purpose, it can ultimately does have the right to increase the budget, but it is up to the town manager to decide how money is spent, so that the specifics are not a town meeting issue. And the fact is that any increases must be paid for either by reductions elsewhere or by taking out of reserves, which has consequences if it's an ongoing or significant factor, because it will, if it's a large amount of money, it would affect the credit rating of the town. If it's an ongoing thing, it has consequences for future years. So it's something to consider with great care. And with that, thank you. I think I only have time for one question. Yes. The question was the current credit rating of the town, and we're rated by Standard & Poor's, and it's AA positive. It's a very sound, or AA stable rather. It's a very sound credit rating, and it's been helpful to have that because it's kept our interest rates very low. I think that I can take one more question, but it has to be quick. I've been told I have 30 seconds.
Yes, for the last 5 or so years, at the end of the fiscal year, the various departments of the town have turned back to the free cash account about $1 million. This year, the Finance Committee said that it was going to make an effort to budget more tightly, so that the returning of that amount of money, the amount of money returned would be less. In other words, we'd have a more realistic budget. Can you tell us how? What were your efforts to do this, and how do you see them as how will they accomplish that goal? In the very brief question, at the end of each year, that there is an amount of money that ends up reverting to free cash, as Mr. O'Connor has stated, and it comes from either one of 2 sources. Either departments don't spend all of the money that is allocated to them, or the revenues come in at a greater amount. We've tended this year to try and be a little bit more aggressive on the budget side, so that on the income side, so that the revenue, we've been making a little bit more aggressive estimates on the revenue side. Of course, the flip side of that is if we did it too closely, we would take the chance of running into the negative at the end of the year, and that in itself would have more dire circumstances. We have not been allocating money to free cash, but free cash has finally crept up from about 5% to, I think I said about 7%, and putting us closer to the middle of that 5 to 15% range of revenues, and so that's, I guess, the best I can do in the amount of time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steinberg. We make a distinction here between operating expenses and capital expenses. Now we're going to hear about the capital side from Ms. Moran.
Articles 15, 16, 17, and 18 are sponsored by the Joint Capital Planning Committee, which has 2 representatives each from the Select Board, the School Committee, the Library Trustees, and the Finance Committee. The Amherst Town Government Act charges JCPC, I'm just going to call it JCPC because it takes too long to say Joint Capital Planning Committee all the time, that committee is charged with advising the town manager on development of a capital budget for the town, the elementary schools, and the library. The capital budget, as Harrison said, is different from the operating budget. It involves spending money for big stuff. That would be major items that have long-term usefulness, equipment, building and facility replacements, repairs or improvements that cost $5,000 or more and will last 5 years or longer. Capital projects for the enterprise funds are in the enterprise funds. They're not in the capital plan that we look at. Capital projects for the regional schools are in the regional school budget funded by the 4 towns. And smaller purchases and repairs are paid for out of the various departments' operating budgets. Joint Capital Planning Committee had to prioritize among all the capital requests for FY13 and postpone more than 1 million of those requests. So it was hard to narrow it down. The spreadsheet that comes with the Joint Capital Planning Committee report, which you should have already, town meeting members should have already received in the mail, and which is also on the town website, includes at the end several pages of a spreadsheet that show the capital projects that we plan for this year and that we expect to be requested in the following 4 years. Don't expect you to read this, but one of these columns is the request for FY13. That's what's coming before town meeting now. And the other ones for FY14 out through FY17 are actually our best educated guess on what the requests will be in the following years. These are going to change as we work on it over the next year, but it's the FY13 request that we're focusing on. As I said, we spent nearly 3 months reviewing the capital requests and prioritizing the projects to fit within the amount of funds that we would have available. On this spreadsheet, this is the first page of the spreadsheet, you'll see that there's some colors. There's some blocks that have a background color, and there are some numbers that have colors. I'm just going to talk about the background colors. Money for capital spending comes from several different sources. The biggest source is taxation, and any money that's coming from taxation won't have any color on the background. It's just plain white. Using 10% of the property tax levy would allow us to keep up with depreciation, though it wouldn't allow us to fund many large projects. However, we've used less than 10% of the levy for many years now. Within my memory, we have never gone that high. And we dropped as low as 5.64% in fiscal year 11. The capital plan for fiscal year 13 uses 6.5% of the local property tax levy, about the same as in the FY12 budget. Debt payments for previously approved capital projects are deducted from that 6.5% and are paid out of it, and the remainder is available for projects proposed for FY13. The second revenue source for capital spending is Chapter 90 money from the state. That's raised through the gasoline tax and can be used only for qualifying road projects and equipment. Article 15 seeks appropriation of $500,000 in Chapter 90 funds for road repairs. On the spreadsheet, you see the yellow? It looks kind of muddy yellow up there, but it's bright yellow on the paper. Chapter 90 money is printed on bright yellow background. Under Article 16, we will seek appropriation of $1,213,804 for equipment. Most of that will come from tax revenue. $33,000 will come from unexpended money previously appropriated but not spent for capital projects. That's got a greenish blue background. And well, there's only one of them in the capital plan this year. So when you look at the paper, you'll see which one it is. $255,000 comes from the ambulance fund to pay for a replacement ambulance and replacement cardiac monitors, defibrillators. The ambulance fund is money collected from health insurance companies and patients for ambulance service, and it can be used only for ambulance-related costs. That's on a light green background. Under Article 17, we will seek $368,396 in tax money for buildings and facilities. Another revenue source is borrowing. On the spreadsheet, dollars from borrowing are on a light gray background. Light gray, not dark gray. Article 18 seeks town meeting authorization to borrow a total of $1,071,000 for police radio equipment, a large dump sander truck for the DPW, repairs to Central Fire Station, and a 3-year program to plant new street trees. This money will be borrowed in FY13 and paid back over several future years. So Article 17 is asking for authorization to borrow the money. It will be spent in future years. You'll hear next about spending requests from the Community Preservation Act Committee, which conducts its own separate process for selecting projects to be paid for from the Community Preservation Act Fund. To display the entire capital spending picture, JCPC's capital plan spreadsheet includes on a pinkish lavender background, yeah, it sort of looks pinkish lavender up there, the Community Preservation Act Committee's proposed FY13 projects. Now I'm going to talk about Article 19 and Articles 19 and 20, which are not part of the FY13 capital budget or capital plan, and JCPC did not do these, did not consider them. Previous capital plans that were presented at previous town meetings authorized borrowing a total of $300,000 to purchase portable classrooms at Marks Meadow School. The town needed to borrow only $220,000 for the purchase. That leaves $80,000 in debt authorization on the town books, and it's no longer needed for the authorized purpose. We can't leave it there. So this is going to ask the town to rescind that authorization. As many of you know, Marks Meadow has since closed. It's a long story, and the portable classrooms are still there, but they're for sale. Nevertheless, we owe money for them. Article 20 is essentially a bookkeeping measure surrounding the same borrowing for Marks Meadow classrooms. Of the $220,000 that was borrowed for the portable classrooms, $6,261.96 was left unspent. It can only be spent for bondable items. We can't just throw it back in the pot for other capital items. It can only go for things that you could borrow for. This article would redirect the $6,261.96 to the amount already allocated for recently completed Bang Center sidewalk repairs, an equivalent amount of tax dollars which had been allocated for those repairs will then revert to free cash. It's an extremely complicated explanation for an article which is about a very small amount of money, and it's just to clean up the books. Are there any questions? Yes. Microphone.
Looking at the spreadsheet, I see that about 60% of the tax funding for capital is going toward debt servicing. I'm looking at the top two lines on the spreadsheet, the $2,695,000, or am I getting my lines wrong? No, okay, so $2,695,000 is that 6.5% of the levy, and the next line down, that the less current debt is $1.5 million, so roughly 60% of that tax money is going, if I'm reading the spreadsheet right, to service debt. And I was wondering what the major past expenditures that we're servicing with that 60% of our tax levy.
It's a good question. Unfortunately, I didn't bring my JCPC report up here, but it does have a chart of debt, past debt, and that we owe. There's things like the high school roof, exterior renovations to town. Oh no, exterior renovations to town hall, the Marks Meadow classrooms, the bond that the town took out last year, $4+ million bond for road repairs. That's the biggest one we've borrowed in a long time. And it's a collection of things. I think it grew because of, and we knew it would, because of the road repair bond that we borrowed last year. The town's debt level, however, in the Standard & Poor's report in February, they said we had a relatively low debt level, and we had a rapid repayment schedule, and that added to their good credit rating for the town. So the thought is we can take on more debt as we're requesting for these big equipment items, particularly because it's an advantageous time to borrow with low interest rates. And the road bond was issued at a very low interest rate. Ms. Streeter?
Hi, on the $80,000 rescission for the classrooms, where does that money go? And if the portable classrooms are sold, where does that money go? Does it stay in the schools? Does it come to the town? Does it go in free cash? Where does it go?
The $80,000 doesn't exist. All that exists is authorization to borrow it. It hasn't been borrowed. Town doesn't have it. This is just going to rescind the authorization to borrow it. And the other part was what will happen to the money when and if the classrooms are sold. I'm guessing that it would be have to be repurposed for a bondable purchase. When the time comes, we'll find out. But I'm guessing it's like that $6,700, that it can't just go into free cash or into the capital, other capital. I don't know. Okay.
Is there another question?
Is there another question? There's one in the back.
Thank you.
On page 7 of the Joint Capital Planning Committee report, the middle paragraph, paragraph 3, speaks about proposed appropriations of $50,000 and $40,000 for consultant activities. Could you explain how these two proposed appropriations have to do with facilities?
We have included similar things in past capital plans. a good deal of the master planning process was funded through capital appropriations. These are considered major expenditures that will result in have long-term results. And that's why they're in there. There's one more question? Do we have time?
The question is maybe appropriate for the CPA folks to talk about, but it looks like the amount of CPA funds will be going down drastically in 14.
I think that the chair of the CPA committee could indeed address that question.
That's fine.
Are there no other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moran. Thank you for the Joint Capital Planning Committee. Is Peter Jessup here? Peter Jessup is the chair of the Community Preservation Act Committee, and he will present their article.
Thank you. Actually, I'll answer that question first, because we don't anticipate that kind of a deduction. I don't know where that figure came from. It wasn't from me. It's a nice plug number, but we expect those to be relatively stable in CPA funds. It's true that the portion of the share that we've been getting from the state has been going down over time. From previously, originally started at about 100% match from the state. It's no longer a match, it's now a share, and we're getting about 25% right now. So we do anticipate that going down, but our 1.5% that's levied on the tax base is not, we don't expect that to change, so we would expect to have similar amounts of money. So I hope that answers that question. And then I'm going to speak very briefly about Community Preservation Act stuff. We will make much longer presentations at town meeting on each of the specific items, so I don't want to go into a lot of detail on them tonight. I just want to give the broad picture, and I want to remind town meeting members that your responsibility is to vote on the recommendations that the Community Preservation Committee makes to town meeting. You cannot fund other projects with Community Preservation Act funds, much as you might like to consider something that is moved from the floor. If there is such a motion, I'm certain that Mr. Gray will rule it out of order, because you can't allocate money to other projects that we haven't recommended. You cannot increase the amount of money on projects that we recommend. You can decrease the amount of money on projects that we recommend or vote them down. So you have the responsibility to decide on the projects that we recommend. You can either vote a lesser amount, no amount, but you can't vote more money or for distinct projects beyond what we have recommended as a committee. So the Community Preservation Act is charged with developing for presentation at town meeting projects that meet the criteria of historic preservation, community housing, open space, and recreation. And we invite the various constituencies in town to make presentations to us each year. And this year we're recommending a total of $532,000 in projects in total. It'll get the Warrant article will actually be broken up into a couple of different categories. What you see before you on Article 21 will be essentially new projects. In the debt, under the debt item, which I think is not shown in this in the paperwork that I have here, there are some ongoing debt for Community Preservation Act projects, specifically the Plum Brook Recreation Area at $34,000, the Town Hall Masonry Project at $27,000, and the Hawthorne property acquisition at $62,000. And that $123,000 of CPA funds is voted in a separate warrant article different from number 21. Those funds have already been obligated. If you choose not to support those with CPA funds, that will cause a bit of a problem for the Finance Committee, the Select Board, and Town Meeting, because there's no other source to repay the funds that were borrowed. The object was to borrow those. We certainly hope you will support those items. They've been decided by previous town meetings, and we trust that this town meeting will see the wisdom in continuing to pay that obligated debt. The town has that obligation regardless of where the funds come from, but we hope that you'll agree to take those out of the CPA budget. It makes perfect sense. So we have projects in the area of affordable housing, Habitat for Humanity for $20,000, and the HAP Olympia Drive project for $250,000. And in historic preservation, we have roof repairs to the Amherst Historical Society for $25,000, and the Amherst Historical Society creation of a database of the 5,000 items that they have there for $22,000, and fencing for the West Cemetery for the Emily Dickinson plot at $40,000. And in open space, we have a $25,000 request for surveys and appraisals, and there's an additional $25,000 request, which is in a separate Article 21C, because it needs to be voted separately. And so that is for $25,000 from the Community Preservation Act for the purpose of requiring a conservation restriction to 2 parcels of land in North Amherst. We will explain all of those in greater detail. Additionally, we are requesting $2,000 for administrative funds. We belong to the statewide organization that oversees the Community Preservation Act. They provide us with valuable information. We have some expenses for mailings and advertising for open meetings and things like that. So we have a small request for administrative funds. And in addition to that, you're being asked to appropriate the sum of $200,000 for a budgeted reserve in our account, so that would allow the Community Preservation Act to bring a proposal before town meeting. It's really kind of a housekeeping item. We actually have about $738,000 available that we could recommend, but the way the projects worked out this year, we're recommending only about $532,000 in projects. So we would like town meeting to vote $200,000 of our money into a budgeted reserve, primarily so that if there's a really terrific project that comes out of conservation sometime between now and the fall, we might bring a request to fall town meeting. Otherwise, this will go into the hopper for use next year or the year after that. So I don't want to go into detail on all the projects, although if you have specific questions, I'd be happy to take them now. Mary Streeter is here, who is a member of the committee, and I don't see anybody else who's currently a member. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. It's a relatively small amount of money compared to the rest of the decisions that you need to make in town meeting. Great.
Your report spoke of various rescissions of unspent funds that you've taken up. What is the process that you use to do that? Because in your report you list unspent balances in various functional areas: housing, open space, and historic preservation.
Sure.
And there appears to be about $600,000 in unspent balances for historic preservation.
We get updates from town staff, and based on the updates from town staff, some monies get rescinded, refunded back into the account, and for ones that are being worked on, we ask for reports from town staff about how they're doing, and it's not our responsibility to oversee those once the money's approved by town meeting. So it's not that we don't take an oversight role to the expenditure of that. We have some interest in that, but it's not specifically our responsibility to see that projects are actually achieved. As I say, we have some interest, but we sort of track that with staff. Yeah, I think if you have questions about that, they might be appropriate for town meeting. Great. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Jessup. Now the major attraction, the planning board. And we're going to hear from Jonathan O'Keefe, who is the chair of the planning board zoning subcommittee.
Thank you. So I have 3 zoning articles to talk to you about tonight. Articles 24 and 25, which are village center rezoning projects in North Amherst and South Amherst, and also Article 26, which is relating to parking. I've got 25 minutes in total. I'm going to spend the bulk of that time on the village center rezoning articles, 24 and 25, but I will try to keep about 5 minutes at the end so I can speak to the parking article as well. So, Articles 24 and 25, as I said, are village center rezoning projects in North Amherst and in South Amherst in the area around Atkins Corners. Both of these projects involve the introduction of something called form-based codes into our zoning bylaw for the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak briefly about form-based codes in general to give you an idea of how they work and why we want to use them in our zoning bylaw. And then I will speak to Atkins Corner, which is the first of the two articles that we'll consider. I'll show you the map of the zoning changes that are proposed there and describe them for you. And then I will do the same for North Amherst. And finally, what I will do is some of you who were town meeting members last fall will recall that we had a similar article in front of town meeting in fall of 2011. That article got a great deal of support in town meeting, but not enough to pass. So we've been working on it ever since then to try to improve it and bring it back this spring. So what I'd like to do is also speak to the changes that we had since last fall. So form-based codes in general are something that people around the country and around New England have been working on over the last 15 or 20 years in response to problems with traditional zoning. Traditional zoning, which we use here in Amherst, works almost entirely by regulating uses, different types of residential uses, different types of commercial, industrial uses. Our zoning describes all those uses, and it describes where they are allowed in town or where they are not allowed. But what it doesn't do is say very much about the form, the look and feel that development takes when those uses are applied. And so the outcome of traditional zoning tends to be unpredictable. People can generally do what they want in respect to how the building, how the development takes place, what it looks like, how it relates to other buildings, how it relates to the street and to parking. And the community doesn't have much control over the form of the final development. So form-based codes have been, as I said, evolving over the past couple decades in response to that, to try to give communities more control over the final built product, more predictable designs. They let the community lay out what it wants to achieve, what types of buildings, what types of development patterns, what types of parking, pedestrian access, things like that. And those are encoded in the zoning bylaw in the form of regulations. They are not design guidelines, they are mandatory, and they need to be followed. So what we've been doing over the past more than a year is meeting with members of the community, holding workshops, trying to get a sense of what types of development patterns people are looking for in both North Amherst and South Amherst, and these articles are a response to that. And so they would use form-based code to regulate development in those two specific areas. So first, I would like to speak about Atkins Corners. Atkins Corners, as you know, has a major road construction project underway right now involving the construction of 2 new roundabouts and an access road behind Atkins Market. And there is the potential or the likelihood of substantial new development in that area. And so what we're doing here is trying to regulate that development so that it is in accordance with community desires. So what you see behind you, and this is also a map that's in this big thick document that's on the back table, it's toward the end. There's a series of maps at the end. The one that we're looking at is called Figure 1A, Atkins Corner Rezoning. And this is one of the series of maps, but this is the most important one. It shows what's being proposed. This is what the zoning would look like if this article were to pass. So the blue area in the center is a new zoning district called Atkins Corners, and that is the district in which these form-based regulations would apply. It covers the area in the center by the 2 roundabouts, which is where Atkins Farm Market is. It extends west along the south side of Bay Road to the Applewood development there. It extends southward along Route 16 on the east side of 116, and it extends slightly to the north of the 2 new roundabouts on the east side of West Street. So in this zoning district, as I said, the form-based regulations would apply, and the uses that would be allowed are uses that are compatible with the village center. There are residential uses allowed, there are commercial activities allowed, but low-impact commercial, the types of commercial uses that would be inappropriate with the village center. We're also proposing going south along 116 on the west side of Route 116, I'm sorry, on the east side of Route 116, applying RVC, which is our Village Center Residence Zoning District, to those areas basically south of the new Atkins Corner zoning district. RVC is intended to surround village centers and provide for residential uses that are higher density than in the outlying residential areas because they're situated close to village centers. We're also proposing some changes to clean up and align the zoning further to the east, the RLD and RO zoning districts. That's low-density residential and outlying residential, the yellow area to the top and the tan area to the bottom. And the final thing I want to mention is north and west of the two new roundabouts, there's a rectangular property with horizontal blue stripes on it. That area belongs to Hampshire College. It's currently zoned RO, which is outlying residential, which is not really appropriate for a property that's owned by the college. So we're proposing extending our existing educational zoning district onto that property on the corner there and applying a new overlay district that would also require the use of these form-based codes for any development along the north side of Bay Road and the west side of Route 116 approaching the roundabout there. So that's South Amherst in a nutshell. I think I covered all the major aspects. I'd like to switch over now to North Amherst and go over that map. Great. So in North Amherst, we also have a new zoning district called the North Amherst Village Center, or NAVC zoning district. Like the Atkins Corner district that I mentioned earlier, it's a new zoning district which allows uses that are compatible with a village center and which would include the new form-based regulations. So the NAVC is the blue area that is most of the central part of this map. It includes the area in the central core of the village center near the intersection of Pine Street / Meadow Street and North Pleasant Street, and then extends northward primarily along Sunderland Road, across the Mill River and upward along Sunderland Road all the way to the intersection with Coles Road, and then follows Coles Road to the east for portions of Coles Road. It roughly corresponds to the existing commercial zoning district that is in place there now. Almost all of that blue area is currently zoned COM, which is commercial, which is it's sort of our highest density kind of strip mall type commercial development zoning district that's really intended for high traffic streets and automotive uses and things like that that aren't really appropriate for a village center. So the main intent of this zoning proposal is to remove that COM zoning and replace it with something that's more compatible with a village center. So also under this proposal, we're proposing small changes to areas immediately surrounding the new NAVC. In particular, we're proposing village center residence zoning on the portion of Montague Road that's immediately north of the Mill River and south of the entrance to the Mill River Recreation Area. That's the area closest to the central core of the village center, and it corresponds with existing RVC zoning that's already in place on the ground today to the west, south, and actually also to the east of the core village center. So this would extend that to the north. And also would apply that same village center residence zoning to the Coles Homestead on the corner of Coles Road and Route 63. Those are the highlights of the map for North Amherst. So now I would like to speak quickly to the changes since last fall, and then I'll put aside a bit of time for questions before we move on to parking. So last fall we had a proposal the proposal we had last fall, the zoning districts for both Atkins Corners and for North Amherst Village Center were considerably larger than what we're proposing here. In North Amherst, which I think is still up on the screen, The proposed zoning district extended to the west, where Rob is highlighting now, almost all the way to 116 in areas that aren't really suitable for development and really should be protected. So we're proposing leaving the existing zoning in place or actually changing some of it. Some of that is currently zoned commercial, which is really strange. But we would be applying the RLD, which is low density residence zoning district, to that area. Last fall, we also proposed extending RVC, which is the Village Center Residential Zoning District, northward on Montague Road, basically from the Mill River up to the area at the intersection of Summer Street and Coles Road that Rob is highlighting there. We had a lot of feedback from people in the area, and they were not happy with that. And so we listened to that, and we changed our proposal to take that feedback into account. We got a ton of feedback actually in town meeting itself, which was very helpful in guiding our deliberations in coming up with this proposal, as well as we've held a whole series of meetings this spring to hear feedback from residents in the area and residents elsewhere on what sorts of things they wanted. So that's a major change, smaller zoning districts, and the smaller RVC that I just spoke to. We also proposed last fall an overlay district in which the underlying uses would not change from what's on the ground today, but where we would apply the new form-based regulations in order to ensure that anything that's built there has the look and feel that's compatible with the village center. And last fall, that area extended all the way up Montague Road, actually north of Coles Road. Rob is highlighting it very well. So that overlay is gone now in response, again, to feedback that we got from people. It also extended to the west along Meadow Street all the way to the intersection with 116. That area also had the overlay, and we're proposing not doing that this time around. We made changes to some of the dimensional regulations in the new zoning districts. The numbers that we had for building coverage and lot coverage were a little bit too high, some people felt, and we came to agree with that. So we've made changes in those building coverage and lot coverage numbers to make them exactly the same as what's in place now in our village center business zoning districts. We've also changed some of the text of the regulations to respond to feedback that we got, in particular giving priority to public transit and handicap accessibility for buildings. And the final thing I want to mention is the illustrations. A lot of the form-based regulations rely on drawings and illustrations, not just text. And we had a set of illustrations that wasn't really representative of Amherst. They were drawn from other areas, and we got some feedback on that people wanted to see more local examples. And so we've done a fair amount of work to try to gather some great examples in Amherst and around Amherst of building forms that we think are worthy of emulation. And those are included in the proposal as well. So that is the most of what I wanted to cover. So I guess I will take some time for questions. I don't see a clock, so I'm not sure how much time I have left. I have 10 minutes. That's great. Do I call on people? Sure.
I have actually two questions. One of them is, do you have the support of the neighborhoods for these zoning changes? And the second one is, did you consider doing a much smaller area for like a pilot to see, so people could see how it goes and feel better about it and maybe agree to it later?
So the first question, there's a diversity of opinion on the ground, and there are quite a few people in the neighborhoods that don't support the proposal. I mean, we've heard a lot of feedback from people who don't like it. We've tried to take their concerns into consideration, but what we're faced with is a situation where people have a wide range of desired outcomes, and we've tried to come up with something that meets those needs as best we can. So it's not the case that everybody likes it, but we've tried to come up with something that we feel is in the best interest of the community. And the second question, did we consider a much smaller area? Not a much smaller area. I mean, we talked a lot about what areas should be covered, and we definitely scaled back what we had proposed last fall. So it is a smaller area, but I mean, it is what it is. It covers the extent that's shown here.
Did you make changes from the fall proposal for Atkins Corners, and which could you show us on the map?
Sure, we did make some changes in Atkins Corners. Thank you, I didn't speak to those. So here comes the map. One of the things that we did in Atkins Corners was, again, reduce the scale of the blue AC zoning district. It extended southward in that area where the mouse is now. There were some concerns in that area about proximity to the Rod and Gun Club that's up the hill on 116, and just the general development potential of those areas. So we pulled the zoning back from that area. We made some technical adjustments to the area that's on Applewood by removing there's an overlay district called PURD that's not compatible with the new zoning district. That's just a minor technical change, but scaling back the the Atkins Corners to the south was the big change there. Sure, and that's a major one that I forgot to mention also. Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Last fall, the article was structured as a single warrant article, Article 17, which covered both North Amherst and South Amherst. We had been working on them together throughout the development of this zoning, and it made sense for us to bring them as a single article. Lots of people didn't like that, and almost everybody said that they preferred to have the opportunity to vote up or down on the two areas separately. So to begin with, this is structured this year as two separate articles. So we will have two separate votes, one on South Amherst, which comes first, and one on North Amherst, which comes after. Each of those articles is structured in a way that introduces the form-based code as the initial part of the article, and then applies that form-based code to the area that we're talking about, whether it's Atkins or North Amherst, and then makes changes on the map to accomplish that. Does that address your question?
If the first one passes, the first part of the second one won't be necessary.
That's correct. Mr. Gregg is asking about the specific language that's in the warrant. If you're reading your warrant, you'll see that the first section of each of these articles is the same, the part about introducing the form-based codes generally, except for the parts that are specific to that area. And so if the first one passes for Atkins Corners, then that section of the second one won't be necessary, and we will make an amended motion to not include that. It's structured that way, again, to allow people to vote separately and in its entirety on both articles. So if the first one were to fail, we would still have the opportunity, town meeting would still have the opportunity to make a decision on the second one.
Yes.
Hi, I'm new to all this, but the form-based codes is what, as I understand it, is anti-strip malls to regulate development that's happening in North Amherst. I just wondered what impact or what kind of regulations does this new form-based codes have on adding more housing to that area? Will there be, for example, will there be regulations to keep that at a low number so that that area will, or there should be some conservation lands? What does the form-based code say about keeping land preserved, and what does it say about adding more housing to that area?
The way the form-based code is structured is it has sections for several different aspects of development patterns. One of those is street types, so it defines different types of streets and what forms of zoning are appropriate on those, or what forms of development are appropriate on those streets. It defines different building types, and it defines open space and different types of open space and how that relates to these other areas. And one of the major things that it does, you mentioned strip malls, is the form basically means, one of the things that the form includes is the relationship of the buildings to the streetscape and the sidewalks and the parking and things like that. It's very much intended to push the buildings toward the street, encourage a walkable pedestrian infrastructure, put parkings behind the building rather than having a sea of parking in front of the building, things like that. One of the predominant aspects of it, in North Amherst in particular, is encouraging the use of the existing development pattern that we call like little house, or big house, little house, back house, barn, where we have these long skinny buildings that developed on long skinny parcels that present like a main building toward the street and then a series of interconnected or perhaps not interconnected buildings trailing off the back. So it specifies that, requires that as the primary design metaphor for multi-unit housing if that were to go in. And so it explicitly rules out the type of cookie cutter development that you see in a typical, if you look at an apartment complex of townhouses where everything is exactly the same and doesn't look anything like what you have in the neighborhood on the ground today. It explicitly does not allow that type of thing.
Yes, in the back row over here.
Thank you. I guess I'll sit down because I've got notes. I wonder if you could tell me if you've developed numbers on the number of buildings and units that could go in under existing zoning. Rough figures, ballpark figures, scenarios, and what could go in under the 2012 NAVC. And then I have a couple of questions about that pulling back of NAVC that the committee did and some other areas. Some folks might look at the north side of Coles Road and say, well, that's a river resource area. Some of it's flagged for wetlands. Similarly, that northern section there of Sunderland Road, where the very northernmost section is pretty rural. There's a farm there. So was there any consideration given to pulling back in those areas? And then finally, I have a question on what specific uses could go in under NAVC on the Schwartz farm, where that is marked for NAVC.
I'm having the folks in the front row are waving their fingers at me. I'll address one aspect of that, the pulling back along the north side of Coles Road. I mean, we looked at lots of different options for dealing with it, but we're dealing with the fact that the existing zoning on the ground today is commercial zoning. And so pulling back would have left that in place or would have needed to be replaced with something else. And so the basic idea here is that the existing zoning is unsatisfactory and we're trying to come up with something better.
Can you take a minute to speak to the parking article?
Yes, I very much need to do that, and the timers are waving at me. So Article 26, Residential Parking Design Regulations. This is also a modified version of an article that we brought to town meeting a year ago. It too is scaled back, but not so much scaled back as changed. That article that we brought a year ago included some changes to the actual number of parking spaces that were required, and that was not well received. So the main thrust of that article and the entire thrust of this article is just about design regulations for parking. It's only about how parking is laid out and regulated, but doesn't change any of the numerical aspects of how many parking spaces are required for different uses. And one of the primary things that this does, the whole article is intended to address parking, which is one of the major issues in town, in particular with rental housing, where people, it's very common to see a large number of cars parked around a house on a continual basis. And our existing zoning does not do a good job of regulating that. In particular, our existing zoning doesn't prevent people from parking basically anywhere on the property. You can park on your lawn, you could park anywhere on a property. The only thing the existing zoning says is that you cannot have more than 2 cars in the front setback. So the single biggest thing that this article does is it requires that all parking anywhere on a residential property must be on a paved surface. So it would explicitly prohibit you from parking on the lawn. And it does a number of other things, in particular for larger parking areas that have 5 or more spaces. It creates requirements for the parking spaces to be marked or delineated. It has some lighting regulations. And it requires people to submit a parking plan to the building commissioner so that the town knows about these larger parking areas and has a way to enforce the regulations. I see a red stop sign, so I am going to stop there.
I'd like to ask just a quick question.
Sure.
These parking regulations, are they grandfathered for the people who already?
They very much are, yes, like all zone, the
Apply only to new construction and new?
that's correct. The question is whether the parking regulations would be grandfathered for existing development, and the answer to the question is yes. Like all zoning, we cannot apply it retroactively, so it would only apply to new construction or changes. However, the town has an ongoing effort to develop parking regulations as part of its municipal bylaw, which would apply everywhere around town. Those are ongoing and they're not done yet, but we hope and expect to see them soon, hopefully as soon as this fall.
Thank you, Mr. O'Keefe.
Thank you.
You should be reminded that changes to the zoning bylaw, such as Mr. O'Keefe was discussing, require a 2/3 vote of town meeting. There's a big difference between a majority vote and a 2/3 vote. In fact, the form-based zoning proposal received a majority people voted yes on it, but it wasn't enough to obtain a 2/3 majority last fall. So that's something to bear in mind. It's a big step to get town meeting, get 2/3 of town meeting to agree to anything. Okay, next. We're going to hear from hear about the local historic district study committee from Jerry Guidara. And Michael Hankey.
My name is Mike Hankey, and I'm chair of the Historical Commission. And we're going to split our time up. I'm going to speak very briefly about the history of the district, and then Jerry's going to talk about the new bylaw. We're all ready to roll. Emily Dickinson cast a very large shadow over the district, and many of us know why. But it also was the heart of Amherst. It was the center of arts, culture, commerce, and industry. These were the people who built the town that we know today. They built the roads, the railroads, they built the churches, they built this very town hall, some of the people that lived in this district. So it's very important to Amherst. Emily Dickinson's important to Amherst as well. She's also important to the state, to the country, and to the entire world. But the other houses in this district and structures are very important to Amherst. The district follows the National Register District exactly. It's very concise, contains 39 properties with 39 landowners. Next slide, please. This is a great map of Amherst in 1886. It's a perspectival map. The properties that are highlighted are the properties that still exist today. Some of them have been modified, but many of them look pretty much as they did when Emily Dickinson was still here. Next slide, please. I'm going to let Jerry speak to the bylaw itself. The bylaw will add a level of control for the district, similar to the demolition delay bylaw, but I will let Jerry speak about that. Next slide, please. 120 communities in Massachusetts have local historic districts, so we know they work. There are also one requirement for becoming a certified local government, which would make us eligible for certain historic preservation loans and grants. Next slide. This wonderful house, this stick-style Victorian, actually it predates Victorian style, but it was on Spring Street, and it was purchased, and then, next slide please, it's gone. So the demolition delay bylaw works for some properties. It does not work for all. Next slide, please. I'm just going to take you quickly through the district. I'm going to talk about a couple of properties in more detail. Just a note, no wealthy families moved to Amherst in the 19th century, but families did become very wealthy here in Amherst in the 19th century. Next slide. This goes without saying. It's a wonderful museum. Next slide, please. If you have not been inside the Evergreens and you want to go back to the 19th century, this is the closest representative of that time period in Amherst. It's absolutely stunning. William Austin Dickinson, who lived there, he practiced law from 1854 to 1895. He was Emily's brother. He founded the Ornamental Tree Society, and like my esteemed colleague to my right, he was a town meeting moderator. He was the treasurer of Amherst College. He asked Frederick Law Olmsted to plan the town common in Wildwood Cemetery. He helped found the Amherst Gas and Water Companies, and he was the clerk of the works for the building of First Congregational Church. Next slide, please. Can't talk about this house, but anyone who's been by it, it's absolutely stunning. Next slide. Mather House, another house which exists in the district and is well cared for. Next slide. The rainbow just happened to be there that day. It's a wonderful place to hang out in Sweetser Park. Grace Church, William Austin Dickinson was the clerk of the works for building it, and Chauncey Leslie was First Church. And Chauncey Leslie built it. Next slide, please. Masonic Temple. Next slide. The Enos Cook House. Time will not allow me to speak about this, but he's a real character. Keep going. Sweetser Park. Next slide. Next slide. These are two Amherst College properties. Next slide. The Leslie Stockbridge House. This is the last house I'll talk about. He was the contractor who built the First Congregational Church and Grace Church, the Palmer Block, many houses in town. He was the chair of the Board of Selectmen, assessor, representative to the General Court, and trustee of Amherst Savings. When he passed away, his wife sold the house to Levi Stockbridge, who was the early promoter of the Agricultural College, instructor in agriculture, full professor. He incorporated the Northampton Amherst Street Railway. He's a justice of the peace, president of the Agricultural College. He was a selectman, and again, he was a moderator at town meeting. And with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Jerry Guadera, who will talk a little bit about the bylaw.
So the local historic district study committee was chartered or organized by the select board a couple, 2.5 years ago. Timeline. To study the possibility of creating this local historic district. The idea was that we don't have regulation in place that can protect perhaps our most important historic neighborhood here. We've seen what's happened with not just demolitions, but also new construction to some of the more important key parts of town. You think of the Bank of America all the time, and you think about what's been created and what it replaced, which was an old 3 or 4 story brick building. So the idea was, how can we formulate some regulations and some building guidelines and protocols that would be work best for this neighborhood and perhaps become a model for other historic neighborhoods. And so we had the typical, more than 24 meetings over 2.5 years that were sparsely attended. Nobody was really paying attention until we came up with some regulations. We looked at expanding the district. We looked at shrinking it. We looked at all the other local historic districts that were created in the state of Massachusetts, and we came up with this regulation. It affects very few property owners, only about 39 of them. Most of the largest property owners, of course, is Amherst College. And there are very few applicants that would be affected by this. We figured out that there were only about 10 building applications a year done on these properties. And we still tried to figure out a way to simplify it and make it as easy as possible for applicants. Any questions, or do we not do questions?
Let's see, how much time do we have? 1 minute. One question.
I just have a familiar question. Of the 39 property owners, are they on board? How many are on board with this?
We haven't actually surveyed them, but we've only heard from 2 or 3 who've been actively against it. Tom Aragood of the Leslie Street, and then the Women's Club. And I think it's Tom Aragood's been attending just about every meeting, so he's against it, and I think he's against regulation as a general concept. I think the Women's Club doesn't fully understand the rule, and hopefully they'll change their mind. And I just saw on the listserv today that Hilda Greenbaum came out pretty strongly against it, and now seems to be easing back from it, having the opportunity to look at it. So what I would recommend is, before you vote on something,
Do the property owners know that this is proposed? And
Oh yeah, we had, along with these 22, or 25 meetings, we also had one public meeting that was actually housed at the Women's Club, and we have another public meeting coming up April 26th. So there's been, and it's been in the newspaper. We, as part of the process also, we sent out a letter, certified letter, I don't know if it was certified, but a letter to every property owner. I'm a property owner, and I got it. So I'm hoping others did.
I guess the other question was, be safe to town meeting.
You can, the ones within the yellow border.
So any property within that border,
Right.
whether you're historical or not.
Right, and it may not add up to 39 because of 39, some of them may be just lots, 39 property lots, building, you know, so that's where the disparity might be.
We have to move on. Okay, we're gonna hear next from Wayling Greeny, the petition under Article 13.
Good evening. Thank you, moderator, for having me here, and thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event tonight. It's a pleasure for me tonight to introduce my fellow citizens who have put this article in front of you, Mr. Kevin Eddings, Ms. Rika Simula-Gooden, and Ms. Mania Gotti. My name is Wayling Greeny. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 10. And the town meeting has been supporting human service funding as far back as in the 80s. So in 1993, that's the most recent record I could find, the Select Board and Finance Committee were supporting funding for about 15 human service agencies. And the amount appropriated was about $91,000. And those agencies, including Amherst Survival Center, Not Bread Alone Soup Kitchen, Family Outreach of Amherst, Every Women's Center, and many other social service agencies. These are agencies, many of them still in existence today. And 10 years later, in 2010, the town meeting were supporting 17 human service agencies. So the number has gone from 15 to 17, and the amount has gone from $91,000 to $152,000. So the names that I rattled off earlier, again, many of them were still there in 2003, such as the Amherst Survival Center, Not Bread Alone Soup Kitchen, Home Sharing, and School Age Tuition Assistance Program, etc. So we had a track record as town meeting to support human service agencies. And it's the tradition of the town meeting to rally its support behind these agencies who help those who are most vulnerable in our community. Unfortunately, in 2007, our then town manager, Mr. Schaefer, succeeded in persuading our select board and finance committee to cut the funding by half. So instead of $152,000, it was down to $66,000. And then a year later, in 2008, it was down to $0. So with great regret, we are no longer a town supporting human service agencies. And the reason was we had CDBG money. And we were told as town meeting members that the money is much more stable and there's much more money available if we would just cut them off our town funding and switch over to CDBG. And in a recent meeting, our town staff announced this is going to be our 6th cycle to come up to renew our CDBG 2-year grant. And last year, we were told we barely squeezed by. The maximum points that we need to accumulate, it was 29 points. If we accumulate more than 29 points, we will not be able to get funding, and we were just barely 28 points. So we were so close to lose the funding. So what does losing the CDBG money mean? That means those 5 agencies are currently receiving town funding, such as Amherst Survival Center and the homeless shelter, plus 3 others, will lose its funding. So the assertion that it's more money, that it's more stable, it simply doesn't hold any water. So the elimination of town funding has forced many of these agencies to cut back on their services. So, for example, Big Brothers and Big Sisters have long waiting lists. And according to the users of Not Bread Alone Soup Kitchen, they stopped serving orange juice. Now instead is Kool-Aid or just plain water. So what service should the town support? If we can support fire, water, fire, and public safeties, these are we consider as really important services as well. Thank you. Any question, if you have?
I'd like to say a word about the procedure on this proposal. The proper way to bring this change to town meeting is to offer an amendment under the community services portion of the operating budget, because your proposal is to include it in the operating budget. So that's why it's been placed on the warrant immediately after the operating budget, Article 12. So I presume that the proponents of this article will bring an amendment under Article 12, under the motion for community services, to achieve what they want to achieve. And if that passes, it will make Article 13 unnecessary. But it'll be up to you what you do with Article 13. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay, so that we do have a procedure for adding something to the operating budget. The preferred procedure is to get it, start early in the budget process and get it added by the, suggested to the Finance Committee and so forth. But you still have the right, if that doesn't work, to bring it before town meeting as an amendment to the operating budget. Are there any questions? We're getting way behind, so I guess we're going to have to postpone any questions till town meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Greeny. Ms. Swift is a petition under Article 28.
I'm sure that most of you have heard of the Supreme Court decision referred to as Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission that was handed down just over 2 years ago. The Supreme Court declared that corporations, which are entities created by the law, have the same rights of free speech as individuals, and that their campaign contributions cannot be regulated. It opened the floodgates of large, undisclosed contributions for election campaigns through super PACs and 501c groups. With newly established 501c front groups that have no disclosure requirement, hiding the source of campaign contributions, we have no way of knowing where they are coming from, including foreign sources. It's clear that the amount of money going into campaigns has increased. In the 2010 election, we had the most expensive election in American history, with nearly $4 billion spent. Money in politics is perhaps the most fundamental problem of our country, overarching every aspect of life. Corporations are dominating our political process with their spending on election campaigns and lobbying to get legislation passed to their advantage or to block laws that would hurt them. A new tactic is to threaten to destroy elected officials who oppose their interests. Banks are doing this now through super PACs. I just read about it this week. Think of any segment of our economy, healthcare, energy, banking, military spending, the environment, and how each is affected by the power of corporate money. On the other hand, to bring the point home, what corporations are supporting municipalities and schools? Since this was a decision based on the Supreme Court's reading of the Constitution, it will require a constitutional amendment to reverse it. A proposed amendment must be passed by 2/3 majority in both the Senate and House, and then ratified by 3/4 of the states. It has been done 27 times. We're calling on the United States Congress to pass and send to the states a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United versus FEC and to restore constitutional rights and fair elections to the people. We're not asking for specific wording of a constitutional amendment. There is widespread support across the political spectrum for such an amendment. Overall, 79% of Americans support one. 82% of independent voters, 68% of Republicans, and 87% of Democrats support one. We are part of a nationwide movement. Many other cities and towns across the country have already passed a resolution like ours. In Massachusetts, 16 cities and towns have passed resolutions, and at least 23 others are working on them. Cities such as New York, Los Angeles, Albany, New York, have also approved them, as well as several states. There is a resolution in the Massachusetts legislature. 11 state attorneys general, including ours, have signed a letter calling on Congress to pass a constitutional amendment. This is a grassroots effort to save our democracy by pushing the town, the state legislature, and Congress to act on our behalf. It's only through these efforts that Congress will act. By passing this article, we are adding Amherst to the list of towns that want action now. And more information on Article 28 is available on the town website at amherstma.gov/tm. Are there any questions?
I think we're going to have to postpone questions till town meeting because we've gotten so far behind. And our last petition article is Vincent O'Connor. We'll speak to that.
The article that I'm going to speak to comes in two parts. The first part has two sections. The first section would establish, by a vote of town meeting to amend our general bylaws, banking policies for the town. The banking policy that I've proposed in the article would require that the town deposits its funds solely in banks that operate within the Commonwealth. In other words, not in interstate banks. When I went to the Finance Committee and the town treasurer was there, she said there is an interstate bank that the town uses for its operating funds. And as a result of that discussion, I am probably going to propose a motion that would exclude the bank that the town uses for its operating funds, but any funds otherwise deposited would be in banks operating solely within the Commonwealth. If you want to understand the nature of the problem, I recommend the article in one of the January Sunday Boston Globes that in great detail interviews and as the South Middlesex Register of Deeds holds forth about his objections to having to follow the state's banking rules or his understanding of them and deposit money in interstate banks that had been flooding his registry offices with fraudulent foreclosure documents. He strongly objected. You can also go to the website of the state treasurer, who has, within the last year, deposited, as part of a program to increase loans to Massachusetts businesses, $216 million in funds, I think no more than 10 million in any bank, and the treasurer of the Commonwealth has done this to promote loans to small businesses. And it's from the statistics presented on his website and in the material that I received from his office, it's quite a successful program. The purpose of this article is obviously, and as I'll make clear at town meeting, the purpose is to retain the funds that are extracted from Massachusetts resident taxpayers in Massachusetts so that they can promote Massachusetts businesses and Massachusetts jobs, and not have these funds go elsewhere to ship U.S. and Massachusetts jobs out of the country. You'll see in the current statistics of where we deposit our money are quite good. I don't have statistics going back 5 years, so I don't know what happened 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 3 years ago. So that is the essence of the second article. The first article, there's a backup in case it proves the town council says we need to ask special legislation to do this, and that would be Part B of Section 1. The second article encourages us to vote to recommend to our legislators that they propose that there be a Bank of Massachusetts. And as was done in North Dakota, which saved North Dakota from the effects of the Great Recession. The second part of the article speaks of and I would simply recommend people who want to understand how a Bank of Massachusetts would function to go to the Bank of North Dakota's website and its history, and you will find everything you need to know about how such a bank would operate to benefit the Commonwealth of Massachusetts rather than large interstate banks, and preserve Massachusetts jobs and businesses.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Ms. Roberts?
I'd like to thank everyone who took time to explain the articles, and also to Amherst Media, which is an incredible resource for all of you. Many programs repeated and on demand, so it's very good preparation. Also, I'd like to thank the local newspapers for giving other information. Look on the listserv, join the listserv that the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee has, which has a lot of information. And the website itself, the town website, is amazing. The Town Meeting Coordinating Committee has events still to come before town meeting. We have a bus tour on Sunday, April 22nd from 2 to 4. Meet in the middle school parking lot at 1:45 because the bus really leaves at 2. We would be visiting sites that are related to articles. A lot of times it helps to really look at an area. Then on the opening night of town meeting, there will be an orientation for new town meeting members in the middle school before town meeting, 6:30 to 7:15. Town meeting starts at 7:30. And it will be down in the gym end of the school, a room that has drama written on the door. It has another name, I forget what it is, the black room or something, black box. But it's right at the bottom of the stairs to the pool, and we'll have signs all over the place. Do give your evaluation forms as you leave, because we try really hard to figure out how we're doing and what we could do better. So do your homework for town meeting, it helps. Oh, precinct meetings, I totally forgot. They are from Tuesday, April 22nd to Sunday, April 29th, and you can go to any precinct meeting according to your schedule. There is a schedule on the town website. It's in the packet that you received, the first packet to town meeting members. Any questions?
There isn't an educational forum. It's on our surveys, but there isn't one scheduled for this.
We have not had a special forum this year.
This is an all-purpose evaluation form.
We tried to save paper and have one for all kinds of events. We frequently do have special forums on issues that could be useful to town meeting members, on issues that are coming before town meeting perhaps in the future. Thank you all for coming.